you know, the only one that is completely documented was, and I share this one only because it's unequivocal. There were 3 boys in Santa Barbara that worked with a man named Alejandro Moreno. Alejandro Moreno had told these young men that on Thursday afternoons there was a teen clinic and they could go get screenings and sexual health services on those days. Well, on one day, these 3 boys decide that they're going to go to the clinic. So they go to the clinic and they walk in, and the person behind the desks says, I don't know why you guys are here. 3 of you are here, but because we're only going to take 1. So the other 2 have to get out of here. That's the way they were. So in typical wonderful boy fashion, F you, they all leave, right? So the next week, they go to the class, and one of them says, Alejandro, what you told us isn't true. They don't have, you know, it's not an open clinic day that you can just walk in without an appointment, because we went and we were all kicked out. Alejandro, having incredible experience with boys, kind of knows that it's a two-way street sometimes, right? So he says, tell you what, on Thursday, I'll pick you up and we'll all go over together. So on that Thursday, Alejandro goes and he picks him up after school, drives them the short distance to the clinic, and they walk into the clinic. Now Alejandro, this health educator who's imposing and a man in and of himself, walks in with 4 boys and himself. And as soon as he walks through the door first, the woman behind the desk says, I told you last week that there's only 1 slot for boys and the rest of you need to get out of here. Well, Alejandro, being the warm-hearted man that he is, he steps up and he says, well, I was under the impression that today's teen clinic day and it's open. And when the clinic director told me that we can refer young people to come here and they don't need an appointment, that it's come, and her comment was, I don't care what the medical director has said. She says, I'm the one that puts the kids on the list, and I only put 1 boy on the list on Thursday. I don't know what had caused this individual to create this policy. But those are the realities that sometimes when young people say, I'm being disrespected, sometimes they are. You know, and that's, I have stories behind stories, and some of them border on barbaric on how boys have been treated. And then we wonder why it's hard to link them to clinical services. Some of them have been, I have experienced directly from the person who created the horror, and they have shared it with pride as that was what they were doing. You know, so it's not lore that's invented, it's lore that I've observed. So we need to work at messages that highlight the importance of males and teen pregnancy prevention, craft programs with male staff and male participants, assure cultural relevance, and reflect the styles and preferences of local young men. It's a whole different ball of wax. Male involvement looks different than any other thing because usually it's community generated and community, you know, driven. And if you expect young men to walk in with bow ties, it ain't that way. They're big now. 15-year-old boys are big. They often have bald heads. And nowadays, they often are very adorned with very colorful tattoos all over their body. And they walk in with an attitude expecting to be rejected because that's their experience. So they walk in with this bravado, and oftentimes when you see that, it can be intimidating to some people. But when you get to know them, it's a completely different ball of wax. And I have the pleasure of knowing young men throughout this country, but particularly in California, that, you know, are gentle, are kind and whatnot. But if you don't know that about them and you see them externally, you can feel very intimidated. In this society, the bigger you are, the darker your skin, and the deeper your voice, the more difficult it is to build those relationships. And that's just the reality. And we need to kind of sometimes understand how we contribute to those things. I want to, we had components, prior to the male involvement program, there was no youth development in California. teen pregnancy prevention was health education and health education only. And when we started working with young men in marginalized community, we started introducing concepts about youth development. And then it kind of took root and everybody started doing it. Now it's kind of, expected. But it also, what we did was we identified and built on the strengths of young men and young adult men, because they had always been viewed in a negative light. So we had to find the things that they were doing correctly and doing well and highlight those things. And we would do this on one-on-one meeting groups or activities or círculos, and we would meet them in the street and invite them, and it would take a long time to get them to be engaged, but it worked. And so now when we were doing research and evaluation, I would go to communities and I would ask them how long they participated in the program. And there would be young men that would say, I've been in the program for 3 years. I've been in the program for 4 years. I've been in the program for 2 weeks. And I would ask the kids that were in it for 3 years sometimes, why do you come? And this is the honest to God truth that they would say in their first response. The information. And I'd sit there, like, really? Really? 3 years. 3 years of coming to program, and it's the information? And then and this is what it would boil down to. The relationship they had built with the staff that were working. And they would then say, well, when I come here, I'm treated with respect. These people are an anomaly. Everybody treats me with disrespect. So that is what the young people would tell you in these marginalized communities. And I would say that in the communities in Iowa, the kids that are living with all the risk factors that intersect, or they're undocumented and don't know, that the relationship building over time is going to be one of the most significant things that you can accomplish. It's very important. And so the final thing that we did in California was we developed this concept, not funded, because of our budget. It was cut about 5 years ago. It was called the Young Men Summit. This was a conference that originally was planned by adults, but ended up being taken over by young men. They would pick the workshop topics. They would assess the presenters. They became the requirement. They said, we require young men that are health educators to be the presenters, no professionals. If you wanted to present, you needed to engage young people. They would pick the keynote speakers, and they had youth keynote speakers. And over time, this was one of the highlights of the whole funding of the program. The requirement to participate was that you had to develop a community service project in your community that you were going to highlight at the summit. And so you would have these incredible concepts, and I remember I had to kind of determine which ones were the projects that were going to be approved. And one day, OFP calls me and they said, we got a car wash proposal. He's like, we're not going to accept a car wash proposal. And I said, well, what's the purpose of the car wash? I don't know, it's a car wash proposal. I said, well, let's call him. So we got him on a conference call, and we had this young man who was 13 years old, and he said, this is what our concept is. We're going to do a free car wash in the community. That is, we're training people how to do it without scratching these very nice cars that other young men had. He says, and we're going to be doing it for free. And when we finish vacuuming and doing the car, we're going to leave packets of information regarding clinics and condom information. And so then I turned to OFP, after the call, and I said, is that something that's, he's like, well, yeah, well, that'll work. And the reality was that later, like the week that followed that car wash, there was a spike in the number of people that called. So it was a wonderful intervention that they did, and it wasn't just a car wash. But the group was highly Latino and African American. There were always very few Asian American youth, and there was even fewer Anglo-American youth. In this one instance, we had this young man who I call Pete. And this is what I mean about engaging young men. He was probably one of 3 of 125 that were Anglo. And we get to the afternoon on Friday, and Pete's sitting in a corner. And we do icebreakers to interact. Pete's interacting lightly. As the person that was responsible for this, I'm kind of wanting to see everybody engage. It was very obvious that Pete wasn't engaged.